All right, let's talk today about the evolution of retail and how shopping centers have changed throughout the decades. Most people think retail real estate is just about buying space, renting it out, but if you don't understand how shopping centers have evolved over the past 50 years, you're missing the entire playbook. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the actual history of retail from the birth of the mall to the rise of service-based shopping centers and what it means for how we buy and operate deals today. Let's rewind time back to the 1950s. We're talking post-World War II. We're going to run the time frame 1950s to the 1970s, the birth of the shopping center. Post-World War II, suburban expansion, the rise of the strip center model. I just got done actually with a book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Talks a lot about time periods and the way people view money and spending habits and just the way, depending on when you were born or the atmosphere or the environment that you were born into, how that is going to change your view of money, habits, what you do, eat, whatever that is. So, interesting book. I highly recommend it. It touches a lot back when post-World War II and the government really forced all of the veterans coming back from the war to start spending money. And it became a consumer, the birth of the consumer economy. Interest rates dropped dramatically. Lending got started where it was very affordable to get a loan, buy a home, and therefore suburban America popped. Homes were being built, cars were being bought, families left the cities, and they wanted convenient shopping along commuter corridors as they commuted into work into the cities. And so this suburban expansion and the birth of the retail corridors is why families left cities in the post-World War II era. The GI Bill gave all these returning soldiers access to home financing, like I mentioned. Suburban home ownership exploded, and the consumer economy is born. When car ownership became the norm, families were no longer tethered to walkable city cores. Developers built tract homes in the suburbs, outside of urban centers, and people needed retail to follow them. So the move to the suburbs wasn't just like a housing shift, it was a shift in where and how people were living their lives. Suddenly, everything needed to be accessible by a car. I think you're living outside the city, you've got to commute in. These aren't central business districts, which became trendy again. Funny how kind of time does a circle, right? Trends always kind of run a circle there. But retail and convenience-based retail especially really followed the car. The era gave rise to an auto-oriented retail center. We're going to dive into really how some of these strip centers became about in this era, relating to the consumer economy for one, and to the automobile. Strip centers started to have large parking lots. Drive-throughs became a thing. Drive-ins, road-facing signage. So think of any down main artery roads that connected residential neighborhoods and main freeways all the way into city centers. Visibility became the key. So if you were a retailer back in those days, your success really depended on visibility from the road and how easy it was for customers to pull in and out and how quick it was for your convenience-based center to operate. So convenience became the new luxury. And this is before malls. This is before big box stores. Strip centers were designed around running errands and not necessarily experiences, right? A strong center would have a grocery store, a dry cleaner, a pharmacy, barbershop, a diner, maybe a coffee shop. These tenants were just your routine daily needs, the beginning of what we call now necessity-based retail, and a concept that we still focus on today. Went full circle. The expansion throughout the 20-year period, the 50s through the 70s, was really developer-driven expansion. So early retail development was supply-driven, not demand-driven. Developers saw a need, they filled it quickly as the suburbs expanded. And municipalities, the cities, the counties were often brought jobs to the areas, it brought tax revenue, it brought essential services. It made sense, right? You really didn't need a complicated demographic study, supply and demand. You really just needed to be in a number of rooftops and a main road, and retail made sense. Let's take it into the 1970s when the OPEC oil embargo of 1973 and 1974 and the subsequent gas crisis that caused really hundreds of gas stations to go bust, mostly in the Los Angeles, some of the bigger markets like that. But this is happening all across the US. When those sites were abandoned, think gas stations, think properties that are located typically on a great corner, right? They were large, they were very easy in and out, maybe dual ingress, egress, again, on a hard corner, on a busy street. As the automobile industry boomed and the car-centric, of the 50s and the 60s, and everything was kind of centered around the automobile, gas stations were popping up everywhere. These abandoned sites, surrounded by chain link fences, awesome locations, oil companies were eager to get rid of these properties and they were priced to sell. Let's move into the 1980s and the 1990s, and we'll call this era the rise of the mall and national chains. So this is where enclosed malls become the cultural hub, if you will. Malls explode in popularity as central commercial centers, social gatherings. These are anchored by giant big boxes and department stores. Think Macy's, Sears, JCPenney. These were not designed for convenience. So these were designed for longer visits, call them destination retail, family outings. It was really somewhere you traveled, you spent hours there, and you ate, you shopped, and you made a day out of it and bring the whole family. So this is not a place where you just shop. These are places that you hung out. They were the original third place before the modern day coffee shop that we hang out now, Starbucks or something. Another phenomenon that was happening during this time period was national chain expansion. So you saw across the country really a standardized tenant mix taking place. All these big box retailers, franchises became a big thing back in the 80s and the 90s, and these models scaled rapidly. Gap, Banana Republic, Radio Shack, Foot Locker. The tenant mix really just became homogenized across the country. You could literally go to a center a couple states away, fly in, and see the exact same tenant mix within the mall. Look at how the landlords were viewing these. They were really favoring credit, the credibility of the tenant, at the expense of local operators. So your local mom and pop started to have kind of a decline. And this was really the golden age for national brands. If you had credit, you could lease a prime space anywhere. And this was really the era of scale. Retail became very corporate during this time period. Retail went from mom and pop to corporate expansion playbooks. A lot of publicly traded companies, they needed growth, which meant they need locations. They had quotas and it was open more locations. Brands like Gap, Foot Locker, Blockbuster would roll out hundreds of stores a year. And then again, franchise models were taking off during this time as well, opening hundreds as well. Subway, Radio Shack, and others that use kind of local operators to scale quickly. So retail really became a land grab at this point. If you were a recognizable brand and had a franchise model, you could dominate a center and landlords were lining up to sign you up. Unfortunately, it was kind of a copy-paste tenant mix. Like I mentioned, you could see really the same mix with the tenants. A co-tenancy would just follow each other around the country. You could literally fly in and see some of the same tenants. So every center started to kind of look the same, right? There wasn't that local feel. There wasn't the local mom and pop. There wasn't the trendy new restaurant that only had a couple of locations around there. It was all of the Applebee's and the Chili's and all those guys. They had good credit. They had good balance sheets. They were signing leases. And that does cause some problems later on. Let's talk about the rise of the credit tenant really being an obsession, right? So landlords and lenders began favoring these national brands. Can make sense, an underwriting perspective, right? You've got all these investment grade credit ratings, therefore they're viewed as lower risk. These tenants could support longer leases, higher TI packages, but when leasing dynamics change and mom and pops often got pushed out because of this, underwriting focused more on the creditworthiness of these businesses rather than the business quality. So TI and building packages, again, were standardized just to meet the corporate specifications and not the local demand. So we're, again, just building for supply and not for the demand of the neighborhood, which big shift in that type of looking through that lens, much more of a demand economy now. Developers started just building spec buildings for national brands. It went from who can I fill this with these pre-built boxes. And that is where the disconnect started. So what was gained and what was lost during this time period? What worked? As a landlord, you had predictable revenue streams, you had lower risk due to standardizing some of your deals, and it was easier to sell some of these bigger portfolios and these bigger power centers, if you will, to more institutional buyers, right? It was easy to underwrite that stuff. What was lost is local flavor, community-rooted tenant mix, resilience. Many of these national brands folded during downturns, folded fast. And centers that were overexposed to specific retail centers, think electronic, fashion-centered retail centers, got just hammered when e-commerce started to hit, really kind of mid-2000s, early to mid-2000s. So what's the irony there? The landlords thought they were de-risking by chasing credit, but they ended up failing. So what's the irony here? Landlords thought that they were de-risking by chasing credit, but they ended up with 6 failing brands on a rent roll 10 years later. So let's fast forward into the late 90s, where we start to see signs of cracks in the retail space. We start to see overbuilding and we start to see signs of saturation. So by the late 90s, retail was definitely becoming overbuilt, and especially the malls. In some of these markets, there was more square footage of retail per capita Florida than there was any demand to support that. So during this time, cracks were definitely starting to show, and it wasn't the concept of retail in general, but it was how and where it was being built. We jump into the early 2000s, let's say 2000 to 2010s, where we've got a little bit of a disruption with e-commerce, and Amazon changes the game. There's no doubt that e-commerce changed retail. It didn't kill retail, but it absolutely changed it. E-commerce introduces convenience without a car. So now you have non-service-based business, think books, electronic stores, apparel. These all start to lose market share because of going online, going digital. And malls and big boxes struggled for the foot traffic. So retail was no longer just about the best location. It was about competing with a warehouse and a delivery van during this time period. And then the retail apocalypse begins, but misunderstood. Dozens of chain bankruptcies, Toys R Us, Payless Shoes, Sports Authority, and the media narrative. Retail is dead. Yes, reality is malls were dying, big power centers were dying, but not all retail. Strip centers and essential tenant mixes still remain resilient. Again, still around since the 1950s. They just need to be redone. Again, retail did not die. It evolved, and landlords who evolved with it, well, they're killing it. And this really leads up to even what we see today, the rise of mixed use and redevelopment plays where dead malls are being converted into residential and retail, educational uses, fulfillment hubs in cities, starting, rezoning mall sites for density, walkability, and redevelopment becomes the new development. But I would definitely say that one of the biggest headwinds we face in redeveloping a mall, any commercial building for that, is the permitting process. It is impossible to get things entitled, zoned, rezoned, and permitted. The time that it takes can kill most deals. Developers really, they struggle with that. They don't predict the timeline well. I've talked to a lot of developers that have said that if they could predict the timeline of the permitting process where they could actually put a shovel in the ground, that would be more beneficial to them than additional tax incentives, extra money, better lending, lower interest rates. If you could predict the timeline of city, county, state approvals, could change the game for redevelopment to speed that up. This is definitely where we're starting to see some upsides, ground up malls, but it's just in fixing what's already there. So let's move into the time period of 2015 until now. Let's say the last 10 years, where the service and experience retail has seen a major shift, really kind of a full circle back to a little bit of a combo, as we talked about, from the 50s to the 70s, all the way through the 80s and 90s, kind of combining those two into that convenience-based type of a center. So this is where retail shifts really from goods to services. And that's a lot of the demand that we see now is gyms, nail salons, medical spas, restaurants, dentists, tutoring, educational type uses. These are all service-based. And these are all tenants that are, call it Amazon-proof. They cannot be replaced by e-commerce. And consumers still want convenience, they want high touch, and they want local experiences. You still can't get a haircut online, and you can't grab tacos on Amazon. That's why this category is booming. We have sticky leases and stable tenant. What that means is really these service-based tenants will often sign longer leases, they'll invest more in their build-out, and they'll stay even longer. So triple net leases started to become the norm over the last decade, meaning landlords can offload expenses, and it really improves the income of the center, but it allows landlords to then reinvest into the center as well and make it more efficient, spend more time putting the tenant mix together and curating kind of a community hub more than just running it on a spreadsheet or something, right? We've talked about this before, where retail is really part art, part science, and really blending those all together, becoming a good operator. It's really forced the retail operator to become good and really build relationships with those tenants and make sure that everybody's doing well. And retail just got smarter, right? Lease structures got tighter. Landlords finally started playing offense during this last decade here. And smaller centers are starting to outperform all the big boxes. Strip centers near rooftops with daily tenant needs really outperform malls, and foot traffic with cash flow. So focus is now a lot on visibility, it's ease of access, it's tenant mix, it's not glitz or scale. Credit is nice, we've talked about that, having a nice balance of a credit national tenant, but blending it in with some of the local mom and pop type tenants too that really care about their business, are staple in the community. And it's not about how big your center is anymore, it's just about how relevant, and we'll call it frictionless. Is it easy to get in and out of? Does it have the tenants that I need on my way home? Is it on the right side of the street? And what does that mean for investors today? Well, it's not just about location, it's about function. The best performing centers really serve as a hub for daily habits and daily needs and not discretionary shopping. And so looking at properties that support health, food, family, convenience, local services, something that touches people's lives every day, definitely a stronger bet. Sum this up, redevelopment is the new development. Investors win by buying these centers that were built for yesterday's tenant, taking a 1950s, 1960s center and building it for today. Whether that's tearing down square footage to add some common area, redoing parking lot to make it more efficient, adding drive-throughs on the outskirts of the parking lot and things and some out parcels there. That's the new win for us. It's tenant mix, it's visibility, it's improvements, it's re-anchoring a dead center. And we're not building new retail. We are just upgrading old new retail to meet the new demand. So a good mix of local operators plus national brand really creates an energy and a resilience. And we don't just trace credit anymore, right? We're chasing tenant categories with longevity and traffic draw. We want foot traffic. We want the tenants to feed off of each other. We want those tenants to have some synergy there. And said this before, but the center is really a business ecosystem. One tenant failing shouldn't tank the entire center. Retail, as we can see, has had quite an evolution, but has also kind of come back full circle. It's changed more in the last 20 years than it did 50 years before that. As investors, we need to know the playbook and we need to know what used to work and the one that doesn't work anymore. At West Hive, this is really our edge, right? We buy service-based retail, these old convenience-based centers, and we buy it because we understand its evolution. We understand where it came from, we know the history of this, and we're just bringing them back to life. And that is the repositioning, and that's where the demand is right now. Thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you just subscribe for more deep dives. I'd love to hear what your favorite era of retail was. And if you've got any examples in your neighborhood of retail center that was redone, you watched it evolve over time, drop a note. We'd love to hear from you guys. Sign up on our newsletter. We're just trying to educate the community and our community on why invest in retail, what retail is all about. We'll get deeper and deeper as we go through these series on how to underwrite these deals, what we're looking for, what makes a good deal. Thank you for joining.